Hello. This video is to provide an overview and a discussion about the final paper, the source-based argument. So now that you've completed your annotated bibliography on artificial intelligence in education or the workplace, let's talk a little bit about turning those individual source summaries and analyses into a cohesive argument. And I want to be clear right now, as I've noted previously, that the annotated bibliography and the final paper are totally different types of writing. Um, so what I want to talk about here is how we can use the information, the notes um, that we hopefully have somewhat internalized from that process and turn that into your essay. So one way to do this is to think of your sources as voices in a conversation, and your job is to facilitate that conversation and guide it toward your main point, your main arguable thesis statement. So you may start by looking across your annotations for patterns. What common themes or ideas appear in multiple sources? What contradictions do you notice? For instance, if one source discusses how AI enhances workplace productivity while another warns about job displacement, you've identified a key tension to explore in your argument. Next, instead of discussing sources one by one, which is what your annotated bibliography essentially does, for your essay, you should organize your paper around ideas. Your paragraph should bring multiple sources into dialogue. For instance, you might write something like, while Angwin warns about overhyped AI capabilities in Silicon Valley, Carucci argues this hype actually underscores the growing need for human creativity and human critical thinking skills in the workplace. This tension suggests, and then you build in your own analyses that will bring it towards your thesis, your point in the paper. So things to think about when you're thinking through your sources is, does one source extend another's ideas? Does one source provide evidence for another's claims? Do sources disagree? If so, why? Does a more recent source update an older one's findings? This seems to actually happen fairly often in writing about generative AI. That's things that I've started to notice when I read about it, where one source from like a year and a half ago will be pointing out um, a particular problem with Gen AI and how that almost makes it so that it's basically useless. But then if we look at this current status of the generative AI a year and a half later, those issues may have already been solved. So that sometimes can happen. However, there are other cases where I found where the the problems that people were noticing early on are problems that persist. Um, I think hallucinations is one of them. So getting back to this idea, when you're drafting, I want you to make sure you're moving beyond simple source summarizing. Instead of writing something like source A says X, followed by source B says Y, combine them. So, for example, the rapid integration of AI in education, documented by Surjadi, raises important questions about maintaining human connection and learning, which Brooks argues is increasingly crucial. So you're combining sources, you're building knowledge by putting different ideas sort of together, um, or noticing when two ideas are similar and linking them together. So remember, your role here is as a guide, and your voice in your writing should frame and connect the sources, explaining their significance to your argument. Don't let sources speak alone. Tell your readers why they matter and how they connect to your larger point about AI's role in education or the workplace. So now to go and just kind of review the directions we have written here, you can kind of see the basic idea. A lot of this will be familiar to you already because you would have had to look at it closely to complete your annotated bibliography. So you should be familiar with obviously the focus, the topic for the essay. You should be familiar with the sources, knowing that you should use two of these sources in your essay, and you should have a total of four sources or more. It can be more than four, but minimum of four sources, minimum two of those sources should be listed here. Now, in terms of some of the steps for this process, hopefully we've already done one. We've understood the assignment. Hopefully we've done the research, the annotated bibliography, and you've read and evaluated sources. You've probably already developed a focused research question. Um, I say probably. I'll say that you have done this, but you may need to continue to revise that. So after you've worked through some of the things I just talked about, you may find that your focus might shift a little bit. Now, here's probably where many of you are if you're just coming off finishing the annotated bibliography. And that's where you're thinking through, okay, how am I going to organize this? And going back on what I was saying at the beginning of this video, the idea is to organize it by ideas or by points. And one way to develop those points is to look closely at your sources and see where they connect, see where they're pointing, and make points related to that. And then in your outline, so if I were doing this, I might have an outline of it, like sort of a general focus for a paragraph, and I might make notes in my outline that I would want to look at source A, B, and C. And I might list a couple sources there. I might even point to specific ideas or language in those sources that would be helpful would be helpful to me to develop that point. And then what I probably do is I then sit down and try to write that paragraph. Um, and go through the process of, okay, here's my point. Let's see how these ideas connect. And then you work through this process. Um, I don't want to say just intuitively, but you work through that process by connecting ideas, seeing what pops up as you're doing the writing as well. And that's really the drafting process here. And so you're going to then go through that process of drafting, and then work through. We'll get feedback, as I noted, the overview video. You'll get peer feedback and feedback from me as well. Um, and then you'll continue to revise and work through that process. Um, Sorry, where did I have the I'm sorry for scrolling. I thought the length requirements stuff were here, but I guess they're down here. Okay. Um, so the length of the paper should be about 1,250 to 1,750 words. That's not including the works cited page. It definitely should include a works cited page with all the sources that are cited in your text and all the sources in your text, all the information that you get from sources, quotes or paraphrasing, should have in-text citations that point to your works cited page. Um, Now, also, as I say here, I have this lengthy statement about guidelines for AI use. Basically, there's many ways that you can use artificial intelligence here to help improve your work, get ideas. Uh, if you are going to do that, I do require that you're taking notes on how you're using that, and that you provide an AI acknowledgement statement. In fact, everybody should have one, even if you don't use it. So you should have an AI acknowledgement statement that talks through sort of your process for using it and try to be as specific as possible. So those are some of the key things for this essay. And a reminder, really, that a lot of this now at this point is independent work. Um, and what I mean by that is you're kind of working through how to do this, getting some feedback along the way. Um, but we really don't have other small assignments to be completed at this point because you're working through your own project, your own focus, your own ideas, and that should be your thinking at this point. Working through how to best articulate what you want to say about this topic.